Thank you for joining me this afternoon. It looks as though President Trump is finishing up the campaign season with a further denunciation of the media as the enemy of the people. And of course, he's talking about specific media, mostly CNN, but other media outlets as well, MSNBC and others, the mainstream, the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and others. And I say, hear, hear. You know, this is about time that we had a prominent leader, in this case, a president of the United States, use his bully pulpit to call out extreme bias in the media. Now, it's one thing to have opinions, of course, and that's something that everyone has. Of course, the NPR, they'll deny having opinions, but they do, and they're entitled to. I mean, bias is part of human nature. We all have our biases. But I think that the media has clearly gone beyond mere bias. And they express open contempt for the President of the United States and the movement that he represents. And they're willing to bend the truth quite often and frequently in that attempt to try to discredit, to hamper, to destroy, to impede our elected president and his attempt to fulfill the exact agenda that he was elected to fulfill. And by the way, if you want to understand President Trump's administration, you need look no further than the Republican platform. President Trump is following that platform to the T, almost without exception, in every way he can. And in this way, it's a great departure from past presidents, both Democrat and Republican, who generally have ignored the platform. But the media has done everything they can to undermine this president. The reporting, as the president says, is unfair. It's not balanced. It's not hinged, frankly. Even a casual listen to MSNBC, people like Chris Matthews, who should know better because he actually knows and likes President Trump personally. Rachel Maddow, who also knows better. She's the highest paid media figure in the business, $7 million a year. And she knows that if she says anything good about Trump, she could lose her audience, so she doesn't. But she knows better. She's not stupid. And there's this other little wimp, this whippersnapper on MSNBC with the horn-rimmed glasses, just dripping with scorn and just vicious, nasty, unpleasant, really, inappropriate, disrespectful garbage that he spews every single night. And I could go on. I could mention certainly on progressive radio, okay, Stephanie Miller with her vulgar, hateful characterizations of President Trump and of all his cabinet members. And it's a constant drumbeat. Now, look, the media generally has leaned left all the way back to Walter Cronkite and his editorializing on the Vietnam War back in 1968. His identification of the Tet Offensive as a failure, when in fact it wasn't. I mean, as a success, I should say, for North Vietnam and the Viet Cong, when in fact it wasn't, and how that undermined America's war efforts. That's serious stuff. But even in that context, generally this kind of hatefulness and scorn was an exception. It was not the rule. There's a general understanding in the responsible mainstream media that while opinions are appropriate, tough reporting is appropriate. I support, for example, historically the release of the Pentagon Papers. We need to know what was going on in Vietnam. That's fair. That's edgy. But there's a difference between that and this unmitigated open hatred and hostility. I mean, Stephanie Rule is another example, just dripping with hatred and scorn and contempt. I mean, listen to Morning Joe, Mika Brzezinski, God, I mean, just the way she talks, so like it's almost like a burden for her. It's beneath her to even mention anything about Donald Trump. And they know better. They know Trump as well. And, the level of this hateful attack has gotten so extreme that President Trump is absolutely right to call it out, to ask the media to operate responsibly, to report toughly on him, and but to do so in a spirit that has some semblance of fairness and balance, And of course, the media response to President Trump's charge is to just heap on more garbage. No wonder there's violence breaking out in this country. I mean, they do deserve a certain amount of responsibility for fanning the flames. I mean, mass media is very influential. It has it's on constantly. It has almost a hypnotic effect on us, especially now with the 24-hour news cycle. When you get 24 hours of hatred and bashing, it does have an effect on the mass psyche. It must have an effect, and I think it does. So, this is the most vicious, ugly, most nasty, dastardly campaign by the media I've seen. I don't think it's coordinated. I don't think people are talking to each other. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I just think it's as if they all had the same computer chip implanted into the back of their brains, and it simply stimulates every day, and they buzz around like a bunch of automatons, attacking our administration and our government, and mouthing these ridiculous platitudes that have really whipped people up into a frenzy. And I've seen this. I've seen it amongst people that I know, and it is ugly. Now, look, the attack on I'm old enough to remember how Reagan was portrayed, and it was not nice. They hated Reagan right up until he had Alzheimer's, in which case suddenly they loved him because he couldn't think anymore. I certainly remember the last days of George W. Bush. That was pretty nasty. And I remember the campaign against Mitt Romney, right? Mitt Romney killed my husband. There was one ad they came out with. Ugly stuff, hateful stuff. But all of that isn't as bad as what we're looking at now. I've never seen anything like it. It's divisive. It's bad for our country. It's bad for our cohesion as a people. We can agree to disagree. We can have vigorous public debate on issues and not get along, and it can get vociferous and emotional. I'm certainly not above that. But let's stop this constant drumbeat of hate. Let's cool it, okay, for the mainstream media. And I'll just end by noting a very hypocritical aspect to this. It's interesting that for decades, going back to Reagan, and certainly even both in the media and amongst people that I personally know, people in my family, people here in my hometown that are on the left, I have heard this drumbeat that the corporate media is lying to you. The corporate media, this and that. They were bashing the media then in a way that Trump isn't, this conspiracy. And there, of course, the mention of corporate, as if it matters that the media, whether they take out corporate papers or not. I mean, the only reason they mention that is that's an attack on capitalism. In other words, the privately owned media is evil because it's private. I mean, that's a philosophical point they're making. But if you take away the corporate piece, in a sense, they were right. The media is lying, and oftentimes the media is biased in many ways. That's true. Of course, what they didn't expect, and what is now coming out more obvious, hopefully to more people, is that the bias is to the left, not the right. That they are on the left generally. I mean, they have to be somewhat middle ground because the United States is a conservative country. I mean, we have freedom here. We've got ownership. We've got private ownership. We are a Judeo-Christian based society, so they can't go too far to the left. But they are left-leaning, and they'll take their shots when they can. All President Trump is doing is he's calling it out, and I say congratulations to him. I hope enough people wake up and understand it, because it's not good for the future for liberals or conservatives. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Chuck Morse. You could check out my books at Amazon Books. Just look my name up, Chuck Morse, M-O-R-S-E, and you'll see a whole ton of books come up. Thanks for watching, everybody.